Hey! 2 weeks ago, I asked which video you guys wanted as a Christmas present, or a holiday gift if you don't celebrate Christmas. And, unsurprisingly, you guys chose Unordinary. But a quick side note here, nice. Anyways, since this is your Christmas present, I want a Christmas present. And since I'm fully aware you have nothing planned, might I recommend subscribing? Ugh. Listen, I hate when YouTubers just do this, but I kind of wanted to see what it does. I could go on YouTube analytics and how it means so much that you can support me and you can unsub if you don't like. Yeah, whatever. Or I could be honest and say the higher number makes my brain happy. Anyways, enjoy your Unordinary gifts. Now, I like to think that you guys are smart people. Not because you watch my videos, no more how often you guys bring things up in the comments. Like, you're allowed to disagree with me, just don't be violent about it. Now, while I might think that you guys are smart, there is one thing that maybe you guys don't seem to quite understand. That being John's ability. So this is what this video is about. I'm going to explain John's ability, and maybe have a little fun surprise at the end. However, before getting into John's slightly confusing ability, we need to talk about abilities in general. If you're unaware, why are you watching a very niche video on Unordinary? But more importantly, the world of the webcomic Unordinary, practically everyone has a unique ability, almost like a superpower. Now, while abilities vary from person to person, some people have very similar abilities. And it also appears that abilities are passed down, kind of like genes. Now, how abilities work themselves is a little bit tricky to explain, but here it goes. Let's talk about the complex topic of aura channels. We don't get a lot on aura channels, but what we do get is from Claire. Typically, people have no control over their aura channels. Aura flows through us naturally as we activate our abilities. And it's a self-regulated system. It's a tad difficult to fully understand this, as this is all we're given on aura channels, but I like to think of them as veins and outputs. It seems that most people have aura channels, kind of like veins flowing throughout them. Now, we're unsure if cripples have them or not, but that's less important. Aura channels seem to flow throughout the person's body. However, when a person uses their ability, the aura seems to channel to a specific part of the body. These outputs seem to depend on the person's ability. We get this shots. When John and Claire are looking at a video of people at a professional tournament or whatever, Claire asks, "Hey, can you tell where she's channeling it to?" And John responds with, hands and feet it seems. And that seems to be correct, as her ability seems to be coming from both her hands and her feet. But also, notice the guy she's up against. It's just coming from his hands. People's outputs are seemingly different and dependent on the person's ability. However, it doesn't mean that they don't have aura that flows through them. That's just where they channel their ability to, hence why I call it their outputs. People have veins throughout their entire system, which the aura flows through all of. But their output is where their ability comes into play. Now, when talking about abilities, there are kind of 3 elements that most people have, and you'll see why I'm a bit iffy on that. The first element is pretty self-explanatory, the power/ability. I'll go more in depth on it in a bit, but it's just the power that you get. It's simple. The next element is the enhancements. Now let's go back to Claire's quote from before, but specifically this line. Aura flows through us naturally as we activate our abilities. Aura boosts a person. Outside of ability, the aura physically makes a person stronger, faster, or more defensive. Remember, these kids are they're still kids. Their bodies aren't just made stronger, faster, or more defensive on their own. The ability itself boosts that. We can take a look at Seraphina or John, 2 characters that have shown having no ability and having an ability. When they had no ability, they often struggled to do feats of strength. But when they do have an ability, even if those abilities don't have to do with physical strength, speed, or defense, they're still stronger, faster, or more defensive. Our last element is a little bit weirder, as it only seems to apply to high tiers and maybe god tiers. There seems to be certain high tiers and god tiers that have a passive ability. The only two I can find are Remy and John. Remy can sense electricity without her ability activated, and John can do the same thing, but with aura. While it seems like high tiers and god tiers can do this, I'm having trouble finding other higher god tier passive abilities. Anyways, these are the 3 elements for someone's ability or aura. Let's dive into the specifics of the abilities themselves. Now, the wiki lists 7 classifications for abilities, and I think that's a lot. So I'm gonna trim it down to 4, being augmentation type abilities, emitter type abilities, mental type abilities, and meta type abilities. Augmentation type abilities are probably the simplest to understand. These abilities typically boost the person themselves. These abilities typically never directly affect their opponents. If I can quote the wiki, augmentation abilities are abilities that alter a user's physical aspect in some manner. And yeah, that's a good way to describe it. These abilities almost always boost the person using it. There are some that add something to them, like the queen of the other school, Rain. Her ability, Arachnid, gives her spider legs, which she can use to attack, defend, or move. Or Terrence's invisibility, or Zeke's phase shift. And something I'll get back to, Aizen's Hunter. Meanwhile, emitter type abilities are a little bit difficult to explain. The 4 categories I combine into emitter type abilities are construction generation, medical abilities, projectile generation abilities, and quantum manipulation abilities. While those all sound incredibly different, the reason I combined these 4 into one was because of what the abilities do. The ability often emits something. It often creates an object or an outside force, I'm gonna say. It's easier to show you than explain them. Projectiles are easy. They create an external force, whether it be a laser beam or projectile shots. Meanwhile, construction abilities are a little weird, where they create an external object to attack or use. Arlo's barrier, Cecile's energy ropes, or these discs. They're external objects. I thought it was weird that these two were separated, but I can understand why. Meanwhile, medical type abilities is the one category that I kind of understand why it was separated. It's usually an external support power, but it can be used to heal themselves. Meanwhile, the weirdest one is quantum manipulation abilities. Time manipulation, lightning, portals, whirlwinds, it's understandable that they're considered different, but often it's just another external force. That's why I'm putting them all into one category, being emitter type abilities. Our next category is mental abilities. These abilities focus on the mind, whether it be the mind of the user or the opponents. These abilities rarely enhance the user. They don't really create or emit anything, focusing on the mind. And our last main category is meta abilities. These abilities focus on the concept of abilities in general. The 2 main ones being the ability gauge, which gauges the abilities of other people, and aura manipulation, John's ability. Now, with basically every ability generally explained, let's talk about John's ability, which is the purpose of this video. John's ability is known as aura manipulation. Claire explains it pretty well. John's ability revolves around aura. When he's around an active ability user, he's able to sample some of their aura and manipulate his own to match it, hence the mirroring effect. Here's how I like to describe it. Imagine everyone's ability is a shape. Arlo's is a circle, Blake is a star, Remy is a lightning bolt. When deactivated, they're gray, but when activated, they turn on. Now, John doesn't technically have a shape, but his ability is to match the shape of an active user. So John can mirror that ability. Actually, he can mirror up to 4 abilities, but we get more. But John's ability lets him alter the natural flow of aura through his own channels, which allows him to increase the intensity of the abilities he copies. This is what makes John so strong. It's not only that he can mirror abilities, but he can also amplify them. Going back to my weird shape metaphor, now not only can he mirror their shape, but he can also make it bigger, amplifying his outputs compared to his opponents. But that's not where people get confused. We hear Claire state, the simpler the ability, the easier it is for him to use. Anything complex or higher level will take him longer to learn. And there are certain abilities, such as my clairvoyance, that he has never successfully copied. John has some limits to mirroring and amplifying. We could talk about Claire's clairvoyance. God. But her ability is confusing and unreliable. So let's talk about Junie's fast forward. During the fight between Junie and the Upside Down Tuesday, we hear from Junie that, well, during our encounter, I don't think Joker ever copied my ability. People who see the future move differently. They're calmer and more calculating. The way Joker responded to my movements were purely reactive. It didn't seem like he knew what was coming. And when the group is questioning why the Joker copies some abilities and not others, Eisen chimes in, saying, it's non-physical. There's no visual feedback. What if he isn't able to mirror abilities he can't see? And here's the biggest problem, and I definitely blame the wording in this situation. Back then, or at least during this chapter, we didn't have the best explanation for John's ability, and therefore we took most of the characters' guesses to be factual. Character guesses are actually a good way to establish information that we don't already have, but sometimes they're just wrong or worded weirdly. Most people focus on Eisen's what if he isn't able to mirror abilities he can't see, but less focused on it's non-physical, there's no visual feedback. This has led so many people stating that John can copy abilities he can't see, but I'm not in love with this explanation, because it's not like he hasn't. Most people say that he cannot mirror Seraphina's ability because he can't see it, and I'd like to point to Eisen. Eisen himself has a strange and unique ability. It's a weird type of augmentation ability, where he does get stronger and faster, whatever, but his most interesting ability is his targets. This target is able to lock on to people, see or hear them through walls, and look at their heart rate and stuff. This ability definitely isn't visible. No one else sees these targets. The only thing they do see is him being stronger, faster, and hitting in certain locations. Yet John has copied this ability twice. So that brings us to the question, why can't John copy certain abilities? We're given 2 restrictions here. Claire's clairvoyance and Junie's fast forward, both of which are mental abilities. So there are a couple of theories I had when I asked myself this question while I was trying and failing to fall asleep. The first one, mental abilities are always on. I don't love this, mainly because I remembered there are more mental abilities, being this girl's lie detection and Keon's memory recall. I had this idea when I remembered that Claire couldn't really turn on or off her abilities, and therefore maybe mental abilities are always present somehow. But after remembering the girl's lie detection and Keon's memory recall, I had a different idea. Maybe mental abilities have lower outputs. Therefore, John has a harder time detecting their aura. Which is not impossible, but we do get to see that Keon's ability level is 5.2, which is very high, and John has definitely copied lower. So that got me to scrap that idea. But it did get me to think of Claire's quote from before. The simpler the ability, the easier it is for him to use. Anything complex or higher level will take him longer to learn. Maybe it's the complexity of the ability itself, and certain ability types just have a naturally higher level of complexity. Out of the 4 categories, augmentation and emitter type abilities are more simpler in nature, being boosting yourself or using an external force. Therefore, it's usually a simpler ability to understand, and therefore a simpler ability to mirror. Meta abilities would be a little more complicated, involving the concept of other abilities. Meanwhile, mental abilities are complex by nature, and therefore John has difficulty mirroring them. I like this theory because it doesn't necessarily mean John can't mirror mental abilities, more that they're just so complex in nature that he has difficulty trying to view it and trying to mirror it. My last theory has to do with outputs. Like I said before, John can see aura, but he can also see where people channel their aura through. These are what I call their outputs. I mentioned this before. But what if mental abilities don't have a direct output? What if mental abilities happen in their minds? Therefore, he's unable to mirror it because he can't detect their aura. I know this sounds stupid, but the one person's ability he failed to mirror was the person who could briefly glimpse into the future. Claire's ability was spontaneous and therefore she couldn't control it, so how could he? This theory only really works with mental abilities, as it happens in your mind. However, I'm not super inclined to believe this one because of Aizen's Hunter ability only happening in his mind. But the trade-off here is that Aizen also gets way stronger, faster, and more durable, so maybe that has to do with the ability, therefore his visual cue. But this brings us to my last question. Can John mirror Seraphina's ability? That depends on which theory you have in mind. Out of the 4, I'm going to focus on the last 2 because I like those more. The complex theory or the mind theory. The complex theory is in favor of mental abilities, but isn't necessarily discounting any other ability. Seraphina's ability has to do with time itself, which is an incredibly complex issue just in general. If John just straight up couldn't mirror extremely complicated abilities, then maybe he couldn't mirror Seraphina's. However, even with this theory, he might be able to. John has been Seraphina's friend for about a year now. John has been very close to her, both in terms of friendship, but more importantly, distance. John has basically only hung around Seraphina and has definitely seen her use her powers often. It could be that John just was trying to figure out how Seraphina's abilities work, not on purpose or to fight her, but more as just a relic from his past, an old habit that dies hard. He looks at people's ability and sees what will make them tick. We can contrast this to Claire, who almost never used her ability around John, and Junie, someone who never cared about John and John never cared about her. John wouldn't have been able to understand their complex abilities because he hasn't seen them. So, with Seraphina being so close to him and using her power so often, he might have had enough time to view her complex ability and be able to mirror it. Meanwhile, if you're using the mind theory, then Seraphina's ability is an emitter type. Even if you don't trust my expertise on that, the wiki lists her under quantum manipulation abilities, alongside Remy's lightning and Abel's explosions, both abilities that John has copied. The point is that I do believe John can copy Seraphina's ability, even if he's a lower level, as we've seen him do it before. Back in New Boston, he challenged the king there, and he mirrored them maybe, and was a lower level. Now, if he can win is a weird question. John is definitely a better fighter than Seraphina. We've seen that even in training, he's outskilled her. Well, it comes down to how fast they can knock each other out. I had something else written here, but I talked to my cousin after this script was written, and we both kind of mentioned Seraphina's ability. I haven't really talked about time manipulation. Incredibly powerful ability. But the two things I focus on was freeze and rewind. Freeze is self-explanatory, you can freeze your opponents. But rewind means you can rewind any damage dealt to you. I mentioned this way back in my Which Webtoon Character Can Be John, not a good video might I add, it's not great, that if Seraphina manages to knock John down in one hit, then Seraphina wins. You can't mirror an ability if you're knocked out or dead. However, the same applies to Seraphina. If Seraphina is unable to knock John down in one hit, then John can mirror her, rewind to rewind any damage dealt to him, and finish her off. We've seen that Seraphina froze her mom, and we're not given Seraphina's ability chart, strangely enough. But we're given that her level is higher than her mother's. So with time manipulation, it could be that the person with a higher level can freeze a person with a lower level. So really, it all matters on that first hit. If Seraphina can knock out John in one hit, then she wins. But if she can't, then it's likely that John will win. I was thinking about comparing his amplified levels, but I couldn't find Seraphina's chart, and I don't think she got one. There are some great charts and stuff on Reddit that I saw, but in the end, if she can't knock him down in one hit, then she loses. But that's just what I think, and what I believe abilities are and types and such. What about you? Did I get something wrong here, or do you just disagree? Leave it in the comments below. But like always, thank you for watching, and have a happy holiday.